Hello, welcome to the 66th episode of the Unifying Force. I'm Cass. Dave. Geo is on Kashyyyk.
I mean, seriously, no, really, I had to explain this to people on the watch along the other day. Really, Geo is where they filmed Kashyyyk. He literally is on Kashyyyk right now. So I'm expecting some cool stories and things when he returns. We shall see. Was there a little green dude with a lightsaber just going ham on? Well, speaking of what we're going to talk about today, right there, it was a big place that we saw, Kashyyyk. So it is the Unifying Forces episode 66. So we're going to talk about and do our darndest to do a deep dive on Order 66. Whew. Stuff. So let's kind of historyfy and talk about this. This is one of those things that I think was kind of alluded to originally in A New Hope, or Star Wars as it was called then, that just like we got the entire Clone Wars 2 movies and series and the whole thing just from a little line that Alec Guinness says. The same thing here is they refer to the destruction of the Jedi Temple in episode 4, right?
Maybe.
Yeah, but go ahead.
I don't think he refers to that destruction of the temple specifically.
Yeah, I don't. I feel that it's referred to in not just the Clone Wars that they're talking about. Maybe not the destruction of the temple, but the downfall of the Jedi. Maybe that's how it's phrased. There's something in there, that some kind of language to that effect, I think. And as Star Wars goes, if something is said at one point, somebody eventually is going to go find it and, tell a whole story about that one little thing. And this time it's George, right? So Order 66 first is seen, and the biggest part of it is seen in episode 3 in Revenge of the Sith. But since has appeared many more times. So what was your reaction, Kat, like the first time you saw Order 66 in Sith?
It was overly convenient and contrived way to deal with a bigger problem that the script had, which is we need to get rid of the Jedi. We need this to fall apart, but they didn't have enough movies to tell that story because they're working on a trilogy. And so they came up with this contrived idea that there's some order that's been pre-programmed into them that'll just do it, but you don't get any fallout or any reaction to that from there's no feedback from what everybody else seems to think of this, that suddenly the Chancellor comes up with this story that he was attacked and now let's go on a absolute Holocaust level massacre because of it. It's like a very contrived type of thing that they expect the audience just to roll with at the time. Really great montage scene. And this Darth Vader marching on the temple is a really cool, iconic set of shots. But I didn't really jive with the idea that it was as simple as just, execute this, or, okay. And then the big one of the biggest problems that the movie is facing is suddenly, resolved. It's like, okay, because it's like, how with the parallel of Julius Caesar and the Roman Empire, how that's going to go with the Jedi being kind of like the Vatican, but Vatican City never really fell, so to speak. Roman Empire never really turned on him. So how are they going to do it in this movie? And it's like, oh, it's a convenient, punch in this digits and we're off to the races. So I was like, okay, that's kind of surprising. Good sequence.
Yeah, I mean it's the Star Wars version of the apocalypse. It's the meteor that killed the dinosaurs. Is everything's got to go at this point to tell the story. It's but it's become a little bit even crazier than that, because now we have all the stories of all the Jedi that survived. We've seen it so many more times. I mean, the original one, I think it was powerful enough on the first watch to hold your attention and go, oh no, especially when the Youngling Slayer 3000 comes out. But you're right. It's very convenient, everything that happens, but they've done it again, and people, as many people don't pick up on it. Like, we talk all the time on all of our shows about how the whole Mandoverse really is not retconning, but like explaining Star Wars, explaining how somehow Palpatine returned. Well, there's a lot of Star Wars explaining that's happened about the orders, the general orders of the Grand Army of the Republic, and what's happened since then. It's not just Order 66. There's these whole orders, and it's paralleled to the general orders of the U.S. military, I would assume, or I guess other militaries may have the same sort of thing. But so there are known orders and things, but 66 is that's it. That's the main deal, and they're all just programmed in. And I mean, the question that sparks, even now that we know about more of them, is why the devil didn't the Jedi just ask for a list of these things at some point? It's just, you're the generals of the Grand Army of the Republic, and you don't know what they all are?
Well, I don't think they knew there were orders that were pre-coded.
Well, I mean, we've seen that in discussion, and I'm not sure exactly where these are, as I'm looking over here on Wikipedia, where Order 4 is in the event the Supreme Chancellor being incapacitated, the command of the Grand Army of the Republic shall fall to the Vice Chair of the Senate until a successor is appointed. Order 5, in the event of the Supreme Chancellor being declared unfit to issue orders, Chief of the Defense Staff shall assume. Okay, yeah, pretty standard, like military orders. But it continues going up to stuff like Order 65, that's in the event of either a majority of the Senate declaring the Supreme Chancellor to be unfit to issue orders, or the Security Council declaring him to be unfit to issue orders. An authenticated order, blah, 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 shall be authorized to detain the Supreme Chancellor with lethal force if necessary, and command of the Grand Army of the Republic shall fall to the acting Chancellor. Like,
that sounds like something that Mace Windu could have enacted instead of just marching into the office saying you're under arrest, since he doesn't have any legal authority to arrest him in that scene anyway.
That's kind of my point. It's like, why don't the generals in command of the clone army know this?
Because all this was written after the movie.
Well, yes. Okay, yes. This is retconning this and that, and they've gotten other appearances and things everywhere. So let's talk about some of the other appearances of Order 66. Other than Sith, what's the one that comes to your mind?
What, in Star Wars?
Yeah, in Star Wars, where else does Order 66 appear that we learn more information about it and other things happen?
Oh, like a Bad Batch or Clone Wars Season 7?
There. Yep. So talk about one of them.
It's been a long time since I've seen either of those, but if memory serves, it was one of the original clones from season 1, the Rookies episode, ends up finding out about this conspiracy and that there were microchips embedded in their brains, which had a particular pre-coded order on it, which it shouldn't have the same number as all the other public orders. It should be something that's just there that he could press a secret button would make more sense. But he finds out that there's like this multiple levels of bureaucracy trying to obscure what this actually is, making it difficult for him to figure it out. And once he finds out what it is, it's basically a long-winded way of explaining, because they don't show in the movie why the troops, like say Commander Cody, is shown to be really, really tight with Obi-Wan.
Mm-hmm.
But the second he gets that order, kill him, blast him.
Yep.
And it's like, huh? And the series of episodes in Bad Batch or whatever, or season 6 or whatever season it was, I think it was season 6 of Clone Wars actually. When Fives, I think it was, is the one who finds out that, oh, this is something that's like a robotic order. Like you become involuntarily admit, like anything, your past relationships, none of it matters. It's like you've suddenly become a robot. And it's basically that's what that whole series of episodes is devoted to doing. And then he gets offed at the end. And so it's like, yeah, filling in the blanks, kind of like you mentioned, the 40 chapters of the Mandoverse have all been serving to explain somehow Palpatine returned to very mixed results. But that's kind of what it's there for. But supposedly he wanted to call it Order 666, and then somebody talked him into reason and said, no, we can't do that. It's like, it's too much.
That's a little bit hitting the nail on the head right there. I'm kind of glad that he got talked out of that, because we all sit around and we're doing this like that's what my virtual Cantina hockey jersey says. Is I don't know that I would have ordered this if it was walking around with 666 in big red letters on my jersey. I don't know that I would have done that. But yeah, is the whole arc where they are in the last season of Clone Wars, where Ahsoka is battling the 332nd, who is turned against her, even though they're sitting there wearing a respectful her markings on their helmets, and they're all after her. Oh, that right there. People all the time are like, well, the cartoons don't count. That's some of the most emotional, like,
yeah.
You don't think so?
That whole finale of season 7 just left me cold. Oh. It's like, okay, we're just killing clones again. It's like, okay, we're storming through a Star Destroyer adjacent again. Okay. Darth Maul has to escape again. Okay. It's like it just. I thought that finale was just very weak, and I don't think the Siege of Mandalore saga. I mean, the part I liked about it was probably the paralleling Maul confronting her while Mace Windu is confronting Palpatine. I thought that was a really neat parallel they do. But I just overall wasn't as over the moon about that, and I didn't really feel like any. Because the thing with the clones, it's like they're all the same personality pretty much. Like there's a few standouts like Rex and Cody and some of the Bad Batch, but for the most part, they say, oh, these are the clones you fought with, whatever. But because they're kind of like robots, like she even says to Rex, oh, they're not really your friends anymore. And then it just proceeds with kind of typical action. But I didn't really feel anything for that.
I think the last bit of it with spoilers for a show that's been off for a long time is. The last bit when she's not a Jedi, realizes this whole thing has gone down, because this could have been one of those what ifs. If Order 66 had not happened and she had come back here at this point, gotten her lightsabers back, discovered that the whole battalion, regiment, whatever group of the clone army was there to honor her, the whole detachment, the 332nd, this could have been Ahsoka back to being a Jedi. We might do a what if episode at some point. What if Ahsoka came back to the Jedi Order? This could have been the time. But Order 66 happened. She has to battle the clones, and that whole deal at the end where she's just kind of standing amidst the graveyard of all of them and the fallen, I guess you'd call it Republic starship, whatever it is, before it became a Star Destroyer, because same deal.
Venator.
Yeah, that was a little bit of something for me. I thought that was a powerful part of it. That's one of the more powerful parts or emotional parts of Order 66 that we've seen on screen. You know, things have been talked about in some of the canon novels and this and that. But the Bad Batch one too is the Bad Batch one where Order 66 happens and we're like, oh no, you're showing it again. It's like this has kind of become the Star Wars version of showing the death of Thomas and Martha Wayne, right?
Yeah, certain shows keep going back to it, and it's like the movie was effective enough. I get it; they're having all these adjacent shows. But...
Yeah, it's well, at some point, if you haven't seen out there, there is like a master cut on YouTube of everything that we've seen in Order 66, kind of putting the whole deal together, and you can watch all the different perspectives, even though some of them kind of contradict each other. But in the Bad Batch, when Clone Force 99 is battling along Caleb Dune and his Jedi Master, and then Hunter and Crosshair have the kind of debate and fight amongst themselves, like, do we execute this? It's like they weren't pre-programmed, or the pre-programming didn't work on them because of their genetic modifications, and Crosshair was still gonna like snuff them out anyway. It's like, nope, good soldiers follow orders, ready. But the rest of them didn't. But we're just like, we're seeing this over and over and trying to throw as much of you know, Star Wars emotion, the emotional moments in Star Wars that we have at us again and again and again. That I think was in animation just as good as one of the ones in live action as well. That was a good perspective to see from these clones. But again, that just had to set up, why are these clones still doing what they're doing, and we got to set up 3 seasons of the Bad Batch, which is about to end, by the way. There's going to be a lot to cover in episode 15. Are you caught up on the Bad Batch, or are you going to binge it?
I'll binge it.
Yeah, I think this one is worth a binge. I know you've had some issues with the other seasons, but no spoilers. This one's probably going to be worth a binge, unless they screw it up in episode 15. Unless they do, which is possible. So, but yeah, is tons of there's more. There's still more appearances of this. There's stories of Jedi that have escaped. Like, isn't Jedi Fallen Order, the entire thing is about what's his face, Cal Kestis, who escaped Order 66 as a Padawan.
Yeah.
So you get those stories, and we're getting. Do you think Tales of the Empire's Bounded? They're going to go back there again, right? That's coming up.
You did that time span. I don't know if they're going to cover any of those same events again.
I mean, we've seen, I think, from the previews that it's kind of explaining where certain Inquisitors come from, right? That's what it looks like, and the Inquisitors are going to be potentially they're fallen Jedi, or Jedi that survived
one of the Temple Guards.
So we may get yet another one. But let's talk about a fun version of Order 66, if you can call it that. Which I mean, there was okay. There is something that made us cheer about Order 66 when we see the return of, but not when we see the return of Ahmed Best in The Mandalorian.
Oh, yeah. I didn't cheer. It's like, okay, that's cool. It's Ahmed Best.
I cheered. I love me some Jar.
That's another plot thread which they left hanging for years now. It's like,
Yep.
it was just randomly in there that it's like, why is this here now, and why are they not fit? It's like, not very good storytelling, but all right.
There's a lot of leaving us hanging for a long time in a lot of Star Wars.
Well, that's one of the problems I had with that Resistance show, which everybody kind of forgets existed. It only ran for 2 seasons, right? Where they got into this very repetitive thing where somebody new shows up at the station, they make friends with the protagonist, and you find out at the end of the episode they're a double agent. Yeah. And then the next episode, rinse, dry, and repeat with a new character, so on and so forth. It's like, okay, when are we going to start paying some of this stuff off? And it just kept going on and on. And, you know, I just kind of was losing it at that point.
I think there's a lot of this stuff in the Mandoverse. You're right that it's just like, when's that going to happen? What's that going to do? And it's going to take longer and longer and longer to get there. Are we going to see some of it in the Mandalorian and Grogu movie?
And when I say longer, I'm not referring obviously to production time, because obviously it takes time to make the shows. Yeah. But I'm referring, of course, to the how many episodes they make you wait till they randomly bring things back up. Like when they, in the Ahsoka episode of season 2, when they brought up, what's her name? Morgan Elsbeth.
Yeah.
And it's like, Ahsoka's like, well, where's Thrawn? And why exactly is she on this planet? What's she doing here? And in hindsight, now that we've seen the Ahsoka series, how did her activities on that planet tie into what she was doing with Thrawn to try and get, it's like, why exactly was she there? Not really sure. But they've already killed her off, so that's not really going to tie back in probably anytime soon.
Well, Morgan Elsbeth's in Tales of the Empire.
Yeah, but but it feels almost like somebody picked up on the plot hole that I just not plot hole, but the thing I just pointed out. Like, oh yeah, why is she hiding out here? Because she was just the head of a corporation. It's not like she's a de facto criminal. But it's like, okay, so you were on this planet, kind of terrorizing, doing this, but aren't you supposed to be over helping Thrawn in the Ahsoka show? Like, wait, why are you over here instead of being over there? And it's like, oh, we'll do Tales of the Empire to provide an origin, but you're providing now an origin for a character you've already killed off, and there's still gaps in the story. So it's like,
not unprecedented. I mean, they did the whole tale. That's the concept of Tales of the Jedi. Dooku's already, and let's explain.
Yeah, but with Dooku, there wasn't really any plot hole or missing information there. It's just like,
well, it was how did the information get removed from the archives?
Well, we knew he did it. It was self-evident when Obi-Wan arrives in Geonosis and Dooku, tries to bribe him and it doesn't work. Because like Yoda says, only a Jedi could erase the files, and you find out that Dooku left 10 years ago. And so it's like, you do the math, and then Jango's saying that he got the job contract 10 years ago. So then it's like, okay, you do the math, and he's the one who did it. They just decided to show us that and throw in Yaddle as well, which was interesting.
What happened to Yaddle? Oh, that's what happened to Yaddle.
Yeah, but that's another thing. It's like I never perceived Yaddle not being in the council chambers in the other movies as her, oh, she must be dead. It's like, okay, well, maybe it's the council. It's like a rotating thing. Just because you're on the council doesn't mean you're there for life. But, I guess that must mean she's dead. And so they did that whole thing. And it's like, oh, okay. Yeah.
This is what the Star Wars does. It finds one little mention of something, and they're like, I wonder what people would know about that. Or they answer questions that we never knew or wanted, that like, why is Han Solo called Han Solo? I knew that was going to get you.
I can't with that. I just, if that's the thought process going into this movie, it's like, no. Kind of like, Prometheus and Covenant, but that's a whole other thing. Whole different franchise. But
yes. It's the same kind of thing. But,
I think that one of the best things the Order 66 sequence did is that it did a lot of world building, because it introduced a bunch of new planets. like Felucia,
Mhm.
Magito, Malastare. And it's like, okay, so you got to see some of these places in live action for the first time or created for the first time.
Because
I like Felucia. What I loved about Felucia is it's an alien environment that's an actual alien environment. It's not just, a monochromatic, this is the forest planet or the snow planet. It felt like something that wouldn't be on Earth, like something that's actually alien for a change. And that's
I
what I
mean,
really liked
it
about it.
felt a little like Pandora.
Yeah, and in certain respects, it felt almost a bit like a desert with just the tie-dye plants or whatever. It's kind of wacky. Um, but that I thought was kind of neat to see in live action. And then the fact that you're seeing some of the characters you've known, like Kiadi-Mundi and
Mhm.
Plo Koon, getting killed. So it's like, oh, geez. So you get, and going to Cato Nemoidia for the first time, and that was really neat to see in live action, where you see all the cities on like the big bridges spanning between the two, stalactite. I'm like, that's really awesome.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, the idea that being that the public is supposed to be sick of the Jedi and losing faith in them because they're warriors and the war's not going around or blah blah blah, but you never really see the public's perception of anything because nobody
Right.
in the general public is the main character, and so when the hit all the hits are carried out, it's like everybody's gathered in the Senate chamber, but you're not really getting the response from every day. Like, what did they think about it? Because clearly nobody objected to this, or the few people that did were in the extreme minority.
Right. You only see like or Bale is you only see that who's not necessarily an ordinary person, but he's a non-Jedi.
Yeah.
But he's still a senator, and so it's that kind of deal. The closest I think we get is the complete apathy of the sisters that Ahsoka runs into and like starts, smuggling drugs. Is you start? She does.
That's a great meme, though. That's a great meme.
But
You know the one I'm talking about.
I do. But it's just like that's the closest we get to the man on the street perspective of what's
Right.
going on in the lower levels of Coruscant, which is nobody gives a crap. Is like we're living our lives. That's when Star Wars becomes Blade Runner. It's like your little problems, we don't care. We're down here living and scraping by.
But it's also like the leap in logic that, okay, isn't it like 2 days ago the Jedi just risked everything to save the Chancellor, and now they're suddenly trying to attack him? And it's like, maybe if they didn't like him, they would have just let Grievous and just to do him in. But the movie has to zip along, and that reminds me of another subplot that was cut from Revenge of the Sith, which was Order 66 adjacent, when Palpatine deliberately, in a very casual manner, let slip to Mace Windu that, oh, Anakin he didn't kill Dooku in a fight, he executed him. And that becomes a whole thing, big subplot in the book, which further pushes Anakin over the edge because of all the other pressures he's already feeling from having all these premonitions and all of his frustrations. And then on top of that, to have Mace Windu and the Council breathing out his neck over committing a summary execution.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really clever fiendishness by Palpatine, and I wish they'd put it in there. He didn't even need to have a ton of screen time. He could have just paid a bit of lip service to it, but it's in the novelization. But I thought that was kind of neat how he's even trying to needle him on that,
Well, and I think that would have added even more to the fact that you see how Palpatine is just manipulating. It's the puppet master. He's doing this over here with this hand and this over there. He's the senator. He's the Sith. He's the chancellor. He's doing all these things. Is if the Jedi hadn't come along, nothing would have happened because like Grievous was being run by Dooku, who's being run by Palpatine. So he was kidnapped. Whether Grievous was told or not, you're not actually supposed to hurt him or do anything. I assume he would be. But whether Grievous was told, well, that dude's actually just your boss because he's my boss.
Well, he was told kidnap him, and Palpatine knew he would have a hard time getting away from the planet.
Yeah.
And that's where he tells Dooku that this is going to be a bait, a bait and lure for General Kenobi and General Skywalker, you would want a rematch with them. But he doesn't tell Dooku that the real reason he's doing all this is because he wants to test his new apprentice and replace Dooku. And of course, he's confident that Anakin will win. And even if he loses, he figures, well, if he loses, fine. Dooku's a better fighter than Grievous, and we'll get out of this somehow.
Yeah. I mean, that level of thing, and that's probably a complicated thing that's coming that we'll be discussing again in like a future episode, because in the build up to the Acolyte, we have like schedules, we have plans for episodes now. Who knew? But to talk about some more of the Sith and how the Sith works, and like the rule of two and where that came from and all that sort of thing, and how Dooku, Maul, Anakin, everything kind of plays into that. And
well, they did already allude to the origins of the rule of two in canon in Clone Wars season 6 when Yoda is going on that vision quest, and he goes to Morband or Korriban, whatever the name is now in canon, and he sees the tomb of Darth Bane, and the effigy of Bane, or the spirit, comes out of the coffin. And he says, "You know who I am?" And Yoda says, "Yes, you're Darth Bane." He says, "You know why I'm significant?" He's like, "Yes, you started the rule of two. You did." And how the reason the Jedi thought they were extinct in Phantom Menace, but at the end of the movie acknowledged, oh yeah, the rule of two, is because they heard of the rule of two, they were aware of it, but they thought it was a rumor. They didn't think, or like an old legend. They didn't think, like, what does Galadriel say? Myth became legend, legend became myth. And it's kind of like
another thing we've got to talk about in the run up to the Acolyte 2 is why did they say that they'd been gone for centuries when the events of the Acolyte, or sorry, 1,000 years? Didn't they say 1,000 years? They said 1,000 years.
In the Phantom Menace, he says the Sith have been extinct for a millennium, and they didn't think they could have returned without them knowing. And at the end, when they acknowledge the rule of two, it's kind of like they were aware of that. Like I was saying, it was a rumor, history became legend, legend became myth, and they just kind of forgot about it. But given that the Acolyte is a bait and switch show, because they told us this was going to be a Sith show from Sith perspectives, and it's not. It's the trailers clearly indicate this is a bunch of Jedi, and somebody is trying to kill the Jedi. I'm like, okay, that's an intriguing premise that somebody wants to kill a Jedi, but it's not, or hunting them, but that's not really what you said the show was going to be. So that leaves the door open that we, the audience, may find out that the villain or the perpetrator, or whatever, is a Sith, but that doesn't mean the Jedi characters will find that out.
The build up to Disney Plus shows is built on hope. Maybe we'll still get what we were promised. Maybe the trailer is just the bait and switch. We'll see.
But like I said, it doesn't just because
don't know, but
we would be clued into things doesn't mean they will be.
Yes.
Sort of like the whole, the Clone Wars season 6 storyline of the origins of Order 66. It's there because they want to humanize the clones, because they've been doing their damnedest to try and give them, like the pilot episode of Clone Wars. I mean, not the movie, but the very first episode where Yoda's the protagonist. He's on the planet. He's talking to each of the clones about how, yes, you're clones, but you each have, you each have specific personalities and certain unique traits and abilities that each others don't have.
Yeah, and even the clones don't get that, because the clones are just completely puzzled when Yoda asked them to take off their helmet so he can see their faces. He's like,
right.
We all have the same
throughout the series, because they've been humanizing the clones so much, they've realized that creates a conflict of interest of sorts with, well, why is it that they suddenly obey the order just because the Chancellor says so? Is it simply military doctrine, or is there something else? And so they came up with the simple answer and say, oh, well, it's because they have these, implanted microchips, even though they could have gone the other way, and perhaps the more appealing way, and said it was just throughout the wars becoming more militaristic and just obeying orders. Yeah. Like, which you've seen plenty of times, like, even Crosshair says it, and then not to mention, even my friend the other day, who's not really a big Star Wars fan at all, I was playing Lego Star Wars here, and he shows up and he looks at this and he's watching me play for a little bit. He's like, I can't figure out why in the hell anybody would think it would be a compatible idea to have Jedi be generals in a war. And I said, that's the issue. And that's probably why the clones would otherwise have no problem following orders and getting rid of them. Because it's like, why do we have a bunch of pacifists leading us into war? It's just why I've said that if Order 66 doesn't happen, the next generation of Jedi are going to be really messed up, because they're, on the one hand, being taught to all the pacifist ways of the Jedi, but being, thrown into the grinder to be on the battlefield all the time, which is a contradiction to what they've been raised to believe.
Ahsoka's a general or a commander, not a general, but a commander at 16.
Yeah, absurd. One of the things I don't like about that character and why I didn't, it's like I just didn't believe it, especially coming right off the heels of episode 2 where Anakin's still really immature. I'm like, I don't care what the situation is. I don't buy that any of them are going to be giving Anakin his own apprentice at that point. It's like, that's not happening.
Well,
not to mention he seemed to mature almost overnight in as bad as the Clone Wars movie was, the one thing it did give us was a much better version of Anakin compared to the episode 2 version, which is still, kind of emotionally vulnerable, immature or whatever. And he has to be, because he's, Ahsoka's, mentor. So he has to be shown to be, more level-headed and stuff. But, character transformation isn't really there.
Luke did become the savior of the universe and the chosen one, like all of like a day and a half after playing Vroom Vroom.
He doesn't go from being, he still feels like his regular self. Like he doesn't go through some massive personality transformation necessarily. Like he even says, he's the hapless farm boy wants to rescue the princess all the way through till about the end of it, where even in the climax, he's playing second fiddle to the rest of the pilots because he's doing what they're telling him to do. He's like, yeah, I have bullseye womp rats in my T-16, so his experience as a T-16 gives him experience to fly the X-Wing. And the Death Star trench is mimicking like that of Beggar's Canyon. So we can buy that he's like that, but it's not like he suddenly becomes this super, his personality level doesn't radically change. He still feels like this starry-eyed kid in the first movie, whereas Empire is a full 3 years later. And you could see that change is justified by the time, he gets to that point. Whereas Anakin, it's the change between episode 2 and the Clone Wars movie is like 9 day in terms of his personality and everything, that how he just, it's like, wow, you've really changed. But for the better, because everybody loves the Anakin from the Clone Wars show.
Oh yeah. The Clone Wars is some really good Star Wars. It's also some really bad Star Wars because there's a lot of it. So there's some that's just,
Yeah, it kind of took to maybe the 3rd, 4th season before it hit its stride, but there were still some good episodes here and there in the first couple seasons.
Yeah. But it's all right. So let's
best moment of Order 66 is when Yoda has that look in his eye when he knows what's going to happen. He's like, and then he just does that awesome backflip and decapitates the two. And then just hearing Tarful and Chewie's response to that, they had no idea it was coming. Like,
the Wookiees are just like, he's just started killing his own dudes. It's like they're just kind of looking at each other like, what? I don't know what's going on. But this was one, like you said, you see a lot of other planets. This was the first time we had seen Kashyyyk. Well, you saw the battle beforehand, but the reason they were battling on Kashyyyk is so you could see Order 66 on Kashyyyk later. It's the first time we'd seen that outside of the holiday special.
Well, the reason Kashyyyk is even in it is because George mentions that he knew that if Yoda and Obi-Wan were on Coruscant, then they would have been there at Palpatine's office, and he can't have them die, and they would have been able to stop it. They would have seen all the turmoil within Anakin and been able to stop him. So he needed to. What are we going to do to what could be more important than to get? Oh, what about the droid attack on the Wookiees? So that happens, and then with Obi-Wan we create the new villain. Each of these prequels has their own mini villain, and Grievous being the role. Oh, that's the guy that Obi-Wan's going to go after him. So that'll explain why he's not around to stop Anakin. Yeah. And that's good because I think the Utapau and Kashyyyk diversions are two of the best segments in the movie that I would have liked to see more screen time devoted to. I'd say Utapau is probably my favorite Star Wars planet. Visually, it's just so cool. It's so unique and different. But you don't get to see as much of it as you would prefer. Like I know they had Spielberg come in and do the storyboard for the monowheel chase, which is originally much longer and a lot more badass, and then they just cut it down to next to nothing. And George, I guess, was so overworked, which is why he invited Spielberg in to direct that scene. And the story, if you watch it's on a bonus feature on the box set or whatever. You could see the extended animatic for it. It was really awesome.
Nice. Well, that's a lot of it. Like you said, there's a lot of Star Wars that the main films. We say this all the time. if you're just watching the main films, you're missing so much Star Wars. It's not that you can't just watch it. We're not saying that. We're not trying to gatekeep and go, okay, if you're just a person who watches the films, you're not a, no. But just trust us. There's so much Star Wars out there you're missing. I cannot be a completionist. There's too much Star Wars. I can't read every book. I can't read every comic. But I try and pick up one here and one there. Like I'll read some of the novels you mentioned, Cato Nemoidia, and seeing that for the first time there. Like Star Wars Brotherhood is an entire story, like a detective whodunit, this kind of thing story of Anakin and Obi-Wan on Cato Nemoidia with this giant accident thing happen. It's a great story. And there's so many more things like that is in the books, the novels, the comics, like, and it's coming back around and it'll be in there now is we're going to get a Mandalorian movie. We're going to get 2 Mandalorian movies. And if you haven't watched shows or like read the Thrawn trilogy, you're presumably they will do something to explain it in something, but it's going to be a little bit harder to follow. I think I don't see how it can't be. All right, so let me ask this about you. You've kind of shot down a couple of what I was saying were the emotional moments. Is Order 66 the most emotional moment in Star Wars? And if it's not, what is? Is it the biggest like tragedy in all of Star Wars, or what?
Probably that and Yoda's death. That was just really sad. It's like I kind of want, especially after you watch all the movies in sequence, it's like you want Yoda to live long enough to see the victory, not as a little spirit sitting on a little fence at Bright Tree Village. You want Yoda to be there to see it, and he's not. Obi-Wan's death is kind of surprising to look on in retrospect after he's such a huge character in the prequels and the Clone Wars show, and yet his death happens so abruptly in the movie and is glossed over very quickly, which is kind of surprising to look at in hindsight to think how that. I mean, it makes perfect sense for the movie when it originally came out, but then watching it in retrospect is kind of, oh, that's interesting, And I know people get worked up about the ending of Empire Strikes Back. That really hits hard for a lot of people. But
so yeah, I thought about this one. I was thinking, oh well, the death of Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. Oh well, nobody cares because you saw them for all of like 13 seconds. Who cares? Nobody cares. But then I thought, well, that was just for us who watched, or me, who watched Star Wars first, and you didn't know anything. But what about people who've grown up or who started watching with Sith, who's watched that and them get there, and then you've watched the Obi-Wan show and what kind of protectors they were, and they've grown to love these characters. Is how emotional is that moment? It more so than for I'm like, okay.
I don't know if anybody grew to love them necessarily. I think they could have used them more and should have used them more in the Obi-Wan show, but maybe. Especially since the thing with Obi-Wan or with Beru and Owen is that it happens off screen.
Yeah.
And that was another bit. Whereas things which should have been sad, like Han Solo's death, just kind of left me cold.
Yeah.
It's like something that just happens for the sake of happening. And it's like telegraphed from the start, but there's no real context as to what this story was, the journey was about between father and son. So why should I really care about it and that kind of thing? And Luke's I thought was kind of sad too. Like you knew it was coming, but it's like it's Luke Skywalker.
Yeah.
Probably one of my favorite moments I thought was really sad in a really great way is when in episode 8 when Luke and Yoda are watching the tree burn and they're having the discussion and Yoda's telling heeded my words not did you, but pass on what you've learned. He's talking about that. I'm like, that's a great scene. Whereas Order 66 is like, yeah, you're seeing characters you like, Kiadi Mundi, get it. But then you have some other characters like Aayla Secura, Luminar Unduli. Like, yeah, Plo Koon is iconic because he's recognizable, but he, at the time Episode 3 came out, he didn't have any speaking lines. Right. He was just unique looking. So it's like, okay, still a really good sequence. I don't know if I would put it as the saddest moment. Like, if you're looking at it from a reading Star Wars history, then yeah, sure, it probably is. But it didn't hit as much.
Well, and the most, maybe not saddest, but most traumatic moment. I mean, yeah, but Master Skywalker, there are too many. Ooh, right there. But yeah, the saddest, Han Solo's death. The saddest part of that was Chewie's reaction, and then it didn't get paid off when Chewie saw Leia again. That should have been the saddest moment in Star Wars. Is Han's dead, Chewie comes back to Leia. Saddest that not yeah. Oh, Rey, poor baby. No.
Or like when Chewie's sitting on the Falcon feeling sad, and I'm like, you should have pulled the camera around as he's sitting there feeling sad
to the
and pulled it so you can see that Chewie's sitting in the co-pilot seat and there's nobody in the pilot seat with the dice hanging. That's what you should have done to really accentuate that. But they gloss over that because we have to have the scene where R2 randomly wakes up to present the map, you know.
Yeah, where R2 just became the backpack. It's like the map. It's the map. It's Dora. No. But what else? I don't think there's any. I think that's the major
part. And the thing about Order 66 is that it birthed a ton of awesome memes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, right there is, I felt the need to give us our own little Excecute episode 66 graphic. You gotta have it. It's like, and when I was looking for stuff to do that, you've got these T-shirts everywhere. It's like, I survived Order 66 and all sorts of things available. Not from the Virtual Cantina, surprisingly. Not on RT Public. I don't think we have an Order 66 shirt, but we should. But there's all sorts of fun stuff out there, and yeah, the memes abound. And what's gonna happen? Like the Yoda sitting on the trooper's chest with the lightsaber going completely through him. Everything. It's
like, and you're telling me
it's not the saddest moment in Star Wars. Maybe it's the funniest moment in Star Wars. That's sick and twisted, but we like
it for sure. But then you also see in that sequence that for some reason the clones are starting to execute the Wookiees. That they're on their not ATSDs but smaller troop, like little individual troop transport things, and they're going around like, all these Wookiees are dead. Move to the east. And it's like, okay, why are you now killing the Wookiees? Maybe they tried to defend the Jedi generals there. Maybe they fought. I'm not sure. Kind of like when Obi-Wan crawls out of the the deep cavern on Utapau, and he sees all of the Powans being rounded up by the clone troopers, like they're arresting him or whatever. I'm like, what's that about? And it's like, I doubt they're arresting them for enslaving the Utai, but it's like they're just kind of around, and like you're seeing the other. I'm guessing every order above 66 is other, subversion of, basic rights that they're starting to kick into high gear at that point.
I think the only one that we've seen above 66 is 99, technically. I think it says not technically part of the orders of the Grand Republic, since it's used exclusively with the Separatists. Similar order named Order 99 existed amongst forces, makes the droids move to the opposing side. So these orders have been a legacy thing since forever,
Yeah, and that would have been a logical Order 99 would have been a logical order to put in at the end of the war to co-opt all of the droid technology, but instead, he tells Vader all droid units are to shut down immediately because they have to explain why you don't see anything droid in the original trilogy, which again, is not something that needs to be explained because the original trilogy only takes place on a few planets over a short period of time. So,
But
that
it's
could still be
also
out there.
explaining the one line, we don't serve their kind here.
Right. That's a carryover from past prejudice, but it's like if Order 99 exists, then it's like, why shut them down when you could just use them for other resources? Like, it seems logical that the Trade Federation would revert to being what it originally was meant to be, a trade federation, the FedEx of the galaxy, that the battle droids would go back to being what they were meant for, which is security droids out of shipping facilities, unless the symbolism of it was too much for people to handle, and they just decided to scrap the whole thing and we should have people do these jobs. Well, that's probably part of it too. People being prejudiced against droids and paranoid.
That's right. The droids are taking our jobs.
Yeah, sort of like why nobody wants to, or not many people who have the ability to do so don't want to embrace nuclear power because they're paranoid. Because they're too paranoid.
It's the level of the thing, and it's the way. It's the wave of the future. It's the wave of the future. Wait until we roll through the drive-through at McDonald's, and it's a droid getting your order wrong instead of a person. But I digress. But so, closing thoughts. Order 66. Where do we go from here? What else are we gonna see? I don't know. Closing thoughts.
Like, what do you mean? Like, where do we go from here? Like, as a show, or
well, like where do you think we're gonna see it again? Like talk about Tales of the Empire. What do you think you're gonna see there?
Well, you've seen effects of it again in Bad Batch, like season 2, with what Palpatine's doing with all the clones, and how he's expediting the phasing out of clones to be replaced with actual people. Because it's much harder, he feels, to corrupt a person than to say corrupt basically a robot, because that's kind of what the clones are. If you have the ability to just put in a microchip and then, because in the movies it made sense why you want to phase it out, because it was never explained that it was like a microchip thing. You just assumed that because there were clones and all singular thinking, that they would just follow the basic training protocol.
Yeah.
Whereas by introducing the idea that it's a microchip, it's like, well, if that's the case, then you could still use clones for your troops in the Empire. There's no reason to really get rid of them, but he decides to do it anyway.
Well, except for the fact that would make an entirely separate new genre of movie, which is Star Wars hackers. And, that's what are we doing? The rebellion is sitting behind a computer trying to figure out how to reprogram the chips. Get the Emperor. And actually, that's one of the orders. That's Order 65. So,
we've seen episodes where some separatist droids had been reprogrammed to be subservient to good guys.
Cassian said I had to.
Yeah, Rogue One and first season of Clone Wars and other places where we've seen that happen.
Yeah. So all the things, but I this will not be the last time that we see Order 66. I hope at some point we get more of Keller and Beck and Grogu.
You see, now that I've made that observation that the creation of this whole microchip subplot negates the need to phase out clones in general, means that why are we phasing out clones? Because it creates an even bigger plot logic issue.
They were gonna die anyway. They were gonna die early. They had to do something.
Make more of them.
It also makes the Empire more evil because now we're not just creating human beings, we're enslaving children. And wait, that's what the Jedi do. Oh, wait.
Well, they can nationalize Camino so they don't have to pay for it anymore, and then they could just keep making clones that they want.
But Star Wars isn't about politics. Remember that. There's no politics in Star Wars. Oh. Anyway, this has been episode 66. Don't turn your lightsabers on us. We will continue, and we'll be back with some other episodes. In 67, we got something planned. I think we like it. I hope Gio will be back for that one because I think he wants to get in on it.
This is news to me.
What? No, I'll tell you off air. I've told you what this is. I'll tell you again. Anyway, Until the next time we see you in 2 weeks.
Yes.
May the force be with you.